Hey, what's up? Grendel Omnibus. This is number three. Now, this is the Grendel transition period after the Christine Spar era, which was the near future. This is essentially going into the far future. This is when Matt basically, you didn't have a Grendel character for many issues. He started doing a lot of experimental kind of writing. He had different artists working. You had these cool collage covers, which I actually dig this. Like something. It looks like something out of a Tool video, but I remember this was way before that. Like David McKean would do stuff like this, photo collage. I actually like this modernist stuff. I know, some right winger I am. The stories are interesting. Nobody in Grendel ever gets away with anything, villain or hero. And this cop, he gets his. This is the cop who helped hunt down Christine Spar, and actually killed her boyfriend who tried to avenge her in Central Park. I had shown that in the last video I did this, but his whole life was based on writing about Grendel, just like Christine Spar's career had been. But now, as an old man, uh, it comes back to haunt him, and vengeance is going to come. And the villains, the heroes, nobody gets out of Grendel alive and unpunished. Kind of like life. Now, the art, like I said, it's just interesting that the artist was a guy named Hannibal King. Now, I don't know if that was a real name because Hannibal King, of course, is the vampire character from Tomb of Dracula who actually helped the heroes fight Dracula. So I don't know if it was a pseudonym. I never heard of this guy doing any art ever again. But the inker for this guy was a guy named Tim Sale. I think you might have heard of him. Like Matt and like a few others, he would become more popular in the 90s. So now you have this story here. Very diverse oligarchs. Matt was always see Matt was like a George Romero, another Pennsylvania guy. These liberal-minded dudes who are actually very fair. Reminded me almost like a young guy, a young kid that lived back then who was also very fair, and now in his 40s is considered the devil, like Grendel, and how he looks at things. Uh, he never ever he always had villains and heroes and just masses of lumpy low life people or bourgeois people, be of all races. Very progressive, man. And the funny thing is here is this explains how we go into the post-apocalyptic Grendel era. You have these oligarchs basically planning a limited nuclear conflict between the two countries. Okay, I just want to say that one of the big problems you have in stories from the 70s or the 80s predicting the future was there's always the Soviet Union issue. Okay, I remember the Soviet Union as a kid. I remember Reagan's speech about nuclear war. It frightened me, and then I forgot about it like 20 minutes later because I was like eight or 9 years old. But the whole issue of the Soviet Union, okay, younger people probably don't remember it. We thought the Soviet Union was probably going to win over America. At least that was the consensus. You had a lot of people, liberals at the time, kind of supporting that concept. Uh, but even the CIA thought the Soviet Union was going to last forever, and it was only a couple of years later that the whole thing collapsed. And there's just be another couple of decades before the America collapses. But that notwithstanding, the Soviet Union, when you see it in these, what the future is going to be like from the 80s, is always that kind of like dating thing where it's like it dates it because nobody thought that thing was going to collapse. And so these oligarchs, these corporate fat cats, of very diverse, okay, that's progressive. They know that they're going to survive this nuclear issue, this limited nuclear strike. So we go into the future. Now it's always funny. Once again, I'm going to bring up John Carpenter with They Live, Escape from New York, and Matt. Anyone that knew history, anyone that was kind of anti-authoritarian, which sort of made you on the left back then, you always sort of knew that the future was going to be ruled by corporations, that you were going to have a lower standard of living, anarchy on the streets. You were gonna have militarized police. Everyone sort of realized that that was gonna kind of happen, or at least they would surmise that speculatively, and they were right. Of course, what direction that came from and how it was done was totally wrong on their part. And it's kind of funny to see that. You figure that some of these guys like Carpenter or even Matt would mention it. Well, actually, Matt wouldn't, because why do you need that in the comic business? And of course, Carpenter vehemently denies a lot of things to this day, but it's kind of funny. We all sort of knew this was going to happen, and it is happening. Isn't that great? So now Tim Sale, I think he drew this. This is his early art style, and this is just now what most people live after this nuclear war. Although, the other thing that no one ever nails is the demographic thing, okay? But it's another thing no one saw happening in any of these futuristic speculative stories. And it's kind of cool because it started to cover Grendel as a drug. And that's something that appears for a long time in this transition period to this feudal period. Drugs, no matter how Mad Max or feudalistic or violent or medieval it got in the Grendel universe, there was always drugs. And that was another thing that Matt kind of nailed in this story. It's kind of like a tragic story of a woman who loves these two guys, and she ends up betraying one of them in a pretty interesting manner. But anyway, the story here, this is actually done later. Like I said, this is from the 80s. I'm still in high school when this is coming out. And then this was done in the pre-period. Now I'm trying to get to the real big story here. I never read this story. It continues the themes, the advertising, the hyper-capitalism, the corporate control. Okay, the one thing it doesn't get right though is the religious aspect, and I'll get into that in a second. But drugs as control, drugs as a soma, as an opiate, right? Advertising, corporations. It's amazing. It's amazing. It really is. Where Grendel, the Hunter Rose and the Christine Spar, the Grendel is now a brand name. Yeah. So Matt was very interesting what he did with this character. You saw the original comic, what it started out as, and what it turns into is absolutely amazing. So now I'm going to get to this story here. This is the first Grendel character after all these issues where where Grendel became kind of a metaphysical thing. It was supposed to be the devil. This mask here, this symbol of it, where it became drugs. It became man's aggression, as Matt would always say. Finally, and this was I think a sophomore in high school when this came out. I remember getting this in the comic store on Avenue U in Brooklyn, if you remember that used bookstore that sold comics. God and the Devil with the evil Catholic Church. Oh boy, I know what you're saying. I know what you're gonna say. Again, whipping on the church again. I know, but this story brought back a Grendel character with the mask and the blade, and it goes into the future. Now let's look at this. Let me read this little thing here. Great American Empire slid into decline, right? Bloated with the extended middle class. Well, don't worry, that's going to disappear now thanks to recent events. Rampant debauchery, military indulgence, standardized communication that mark all imperial old age. There's the historicism. And I like how he brings up the actual dying of America began when the law enforcement formed a confederation and the transition to a feudal state. So basically, in this far future here, you have a feudal society where the Catholic Church is this huge power in it. Okay, and you have the Pope. Now, who is this guy? Well, he's like a historical power grab Pope. If you ever see the film Priest, the futuristic vampire film, it's based on a Korean comic. I will say right now, there is that Korean, whoever that Korean was, he must have read this comic. This is literally like the movie Priest, except in 1988. Okay, and more than just with the church, there's something other element that comes up in this. So you have this, evil pope. I know, but I'll be honest with you. I know you a fan of the current Catholic Church and the pope you have now. You're not, aren't you? Anyway, so this story reintroduces a Grendel, a guy who comes. It actually introduces this character, this mysterious Grendel who comes, the devil, and he's like a homeless looking Grendel, but you'll get more on that later. But this character, who is this guy? This decadent playboy who has a very strange relationship with his sisters. I'll leave it at that. He's no angel. Orion Asante. Okay, now he becomes a character later, but he's actually the hero. He's the guy trying to investigate this pope who's very corrupt. And then the devil shows up, Grendel. Great story. You have a lot of interesting scenes here. You have a scene here with certain people rampaging. What is it? Oh, Matt, what are you doing, Matt? What are you doing? Look at this. And, uh-oh. Yeah, this is one of Orion's help friends. And, of course, the cops come. But that was interesting, right? You don't see that often. And the story starts to get more complex. You start to see who this guy is. Is that Arthur Fleck? No, it's Epi Thatcher. Right? And you have this other character. Who's this? So these characters are all going to come later into this epic story. But I was always happy with this because you had a Grendel again. You had the masked character with the blade causing havoc. Now, I'll leave it at this. I don't want to give this away. This character, you've seen this character before in Grendel. Okay. I guess there's a little transracial thing going on, but this Pope is a character from earlier on. Leave it at this. And you have a scene here where, what is this? The Pope's actually fighting Grendel. Right? And Grendel is he's a drug addict too, but this character, who is this character? We've seen this character before. Okay? Yeah. The vampire villain who Christine Spar almost defeated and who escaped. Well, the Japanese vampire is now the Pope of the Catholic Church. So this really gets crazy. It gets really nuts. It leads to a crescendo. There's a lot of funny things going on. The vampire plague begins from this, and these characters go into the next story, and it just goes in totally insane. It just goes to a crazy crescendo where the the homeless bum Grendel makes an armor out of all the Catholic Church's riches, and finally this character, let's just say, gets his comeuppance. This vampire character, all the way from issue number 1, and of course, this Devil's Reign. I had a video covering this. This is the aftermath. This is actually even better than this action-packed one, but I had gone over that. So it goes into this pretty much to the end, and that covers the end of Devil's Reign and this omnibus. Okay. This covers the Comico Reign. When this comic ended, when the last issue of Devil's Reign, which I covered, ended, something else ended. The Comico Comic Company ended. And apparently Matt was not allowed to use his characters anymore for 2 years. There was a lawsuit and everything. So the next Grendel story that would appear after the last issue of Comico, it would be 2 years later by Dark Horse. Yup, Grendel Warchild, Okay, with the Grendel Prime, who is the Grendel that most of you probably know, but I'm gonna get into that in volume 4 later.